Now, as you know, there's a lot of interest right now in the bird flu. It seems like there's a news story about the coming pandemic on the news or in the newspapers every day. Many people are wondering why we should be worried about it at all. Dr. Lobb, is there a difference between human flu viruses and bird flu viruses? And if there is, will humic acid be effective against the H5N1 so-called avian flu virus?
Well, the difference between influenza viruses is in the hemagglutinin and neuraminidase surface receptors. There are at least 15 different types of H receptors and at least 9 types of N receptors. And flu viruses can have combinations of the H and N factors, if you will, that make them different substrains of influenza A virus. So, for example, you could have H3N2 or H1N1. The H1N1 would be the first type of H surface receptor. The N1 would indicate the first type of N receptor. That being the case, there are obviously a very large number of combinations of different kinds of H and N flu viruses. The H5N1 virus, the bird flu, is deadly, in fact much more deadly than H3N2 or H1N1 viruses, primarily because people haven't been exposed to the H5N1 virus, whereas H3N2 and H1N1 have been endemic throughout the population for several years now. So there is no vaccine at the present time that is available for H5N1. There are some prescription medications which are touted to be effective against H5N1, although there hasn't been substantial clinical evidence, at least that I have seen, that has demonstrated that these prescription medications are in fact effective against H5N1 virus. The materials are said to be, the H5N1 virus, for example, is said to be bird flu, but really that's a misnomer. The H5N1 virus, as well as most other influenza viruses that we're aware of, originate actually in ducks and are incubated in pigs. Swine and ducks and swine are raised together in farms, particularly in China, for example. And the combination of those two animals being raised together is the primary source of influenza viruses. So in a sense, all influenza viruses are bird viruses because they originate in birds and are incubated in swine and then passed to people. The saving grace about the H5N1 virus so far is that it has not demonstrated dramatic contagion. That is, at least with people, it's not easily passed, that is to say, from one person to another person. It certainly is in birds. Millions of chickens, ducks and geese as well, have died from the bird flu because it is very contagious among those populations. But so far, knock on wood, the material is not proving to be contagious between people. However, that's not to say that that will not occur. The newspapers today are full of stories and conjecture as well, and in addition plans, in fact, about what to do in case of contagion from the bird flu, the H5N1 virus. Things such as very dramatic measures like quarantining whole cities. Because of the lack of proper and effective medications, at least so far as we know right now, that may in fact be the only way to stop the spread of the avian flu. The avian flu would be particularly deadly. The flu in 1918, so-called Spanish flu, which is thought to be closely related to the avian flu, killed something like 40 million people worldwide. The reason it didn't kill more people was because of the lack of international transportation at that time. So, in effect, population groups were self-quarantined. They didn't travel internationally as we travel today internationally. The potential for casualties from avian flu today are very substantially higher than occurred in 1918. And that's why there is such great concern about the avian flu. The humic acid materials that I've looked at are particularly effective against influenza viruses, probably more so than any other virus that we've taken a look at. For example, if you have the flu symptoms, if you get an onset of flu symptoms in an afternoon, by ingesting humic acid around 250 milligrams, say, or 250 milligrams to 500 milligrams immediately, and then following that dose, again 250 to 500 milligrams, 3 times a day, what I have seen in any number of anecdotal cases now is that the flu symptoms persist for about a day. So following following the onset of flu symptoms, first appearance of flu symptoms, say in an afternoon, the next day individuals, by and large, become sick with the flu, and it's the usual flu type symptoms: achy feeling, weak musculature, fevery, that sort of thing, just feeling fluey. The following day, continuing with, again, 250 to 500 milligrams or so humic acid 3 times a day, the individual feels 100% better, almost as if the individual were not sick at all. The day after that, the symptoms have disappeared entirely. So the flu, in other words, becomes about a day and a half event with taking humic acid as a therapy. So in terms of prophylactic use, it makes sense to me, and it's certainly something that I do as well. I take 250 milligrams of humic acid twice a day, once in the morning, once in the evening. And in fact, haven't been sick since I started doing that with any sort of viral infection, but certainly not colds or the flu. Colds, by the way, are just another type of virus. Coronavirus, for example, is one of the viruses that was responsible for the SARS problem of a year or so ago. Rhinoviruses are another aspect or another component of common colds. Again, these are just viruses, and bearing in mind that humic acid is broad spectrum, people who take humic acid on a prophylactic basis are substantially protected against those kinds of viruses. And again, this is going to be particularly important in terms of avian flu. Unfortunately, I have to predict, along with World Health Organization, Centers for Disease Control, it really isn't a matter of if the avian flu gets here, it's only a matter of when.